G'day, ajmahari. Oh, I always do that thing in front of the microphone. Ajmahari here. Having a little bit of a, what do you call it? Logistical issue here with the phone and the microphone and hello. Anyway, yeah, if you find my content helpful or if you're new here and you think you might, please subscribe and hit the notification bell and help this channel to outgrow me, huh? No, just help this channel to grow a little bit so that more people like yourself, if you find my content helpful or you resonate with me and you might want to book sessions with me, more people like you can find me out here. So, person left a comment on the podcast episode I did, BPD Arrested Emotional Development and Object-Other Relating. And the commenter says, and I believe the commenter is, yes, a man. I am beginning to think of persons with BPD with an understanding that their emotional, quote, arrested development, unquote, makes them function in relationships as at a, quote, primal, unquote, level with very low or attenuated connection capability with others. Sort of like the basic animal love, in quotes, but with no real sense of, in quotes, intellectual love. I'm not sure there's much about love that's actually intellectual. I mean, I don't know. That's interesting. So, with no real sense of intellectual love at a higher level, like a dog. Sorry. I'm sorry. That's a little bit funny because dogs don't have, at least not that I'm aware of, or that people are aware of, dogs don't have intellectual love. So that was like confusing. But you said basic animal love. But I mean, a dog's love is, one of the best kinds of love on earth because it's incredibly unconditional. And I have a dog looking at me over there right now. So anyway, like a dog, they may seem to love you, but they cannot talk to you. Interesting. I won't get too bogged down in this because part of the beauty probably of animals and our dogs, our pets and our beloved, family members, dogs, probably part of the wonder of that and the unconditional love is the fact that they don't say anything to us. I mean, they have ways of expressing themselves, but it's not English. You know what I mean? Like I have a dog who very much is talkative. And, but I mean, when she's doing her and stuff, yeah, I decipher what that means for a dog, but it's like, so when I say she's talkative, no, I'm not hearing her talk, and I'm not hearing English, but, yeah, so, anyways, I'll go on with the comment and see what comes next with that. So like a dog, they may seem to love you, but they cannot talk to you. I say this not to be demeaning or to insult persons with BPD. Yeah, hey, don't insult dogs either, right? But to get a better understanding on the disconnect. And you know what, commenters? Interesting because I don't know how that's going to give you better understanding on the disconnect. Like it might, but I'm not sort of tuned into that at the moment, so to speak. Where was I? As you mentioned, the commenter continues, as you mentioned, persons with BPD can and do have great cognitive abilities. Yes, but not when they intertwine with emotions often. But yes, they can be very intelligent. They can have lots of cognitive skills, but not really in the relational arena. And commenter continues, to me, it would seem that they are limited by fear, capitalizes some words here, like great cognitive abilities, capitalized fear, and basic, capitalized black, and capitalized white thinking. A capitalized deeper examination of this would be, quote, fascinating, unquote, as it would, excuse me, also seem that there is a tie in with a defense with a defense mechanism that keeps the capitalized self convincing, quote, self-blaming, capitalized pressure cooker, unquote, of BPD life ongoing. Well, there's a lot to unpack in that. So let me just go back over and insert some comments, right? So this person is beginning to think persons with BPD with an understanding that their emotional arrested development makes them function in relationships at a primal level with very low attenuated connection capability with others. Well, yes, they are. I wouldn't say very low level even, because it's so fractured. They are so fractured. The emotional arrested development, yes, it leaves them with primal wounding that creates the inability to connect and attach, and it is the primal fractured woundedness that creates the loss of self in people with BPD. So is that like a low level? I would say, yes, you could call it a low level, but it's also, what'd you say, makes them function in relationships at a primal level with very low attenuated connection capability with others. Well, for many people with BPD, that very low, as you describe it, which is reasonable to say, will be zero, okay? Because there's no self. And how is anybody supposed to relate to another human being when they can't even relate to themselves? So it's that arrested emotional development that stops by or before the age of 2, that stops the development of an otherwise burgeoning authentic self. So it's a fractured off reality. So essentially, using the transactional psychodynamic modality of Eric Berne, parent, adult, child, as opposed to Freudian stuff, the child part of ego state, the child part of ego in people that will go on to have BPD, in arrested emotional development, fractures right off. It's just gone. So they stop being able, and this usually happens very primally, it usually happens in the first, it can somewhat start in the womb, and it can happen in the first days to weeks to months of life, or it can be more even happening, by the age of 1 or 2. But for most people with BPD, when it is going to be the situation, which is for the majority of people with BPD, with a cluster B parent, but not always, it often, that arrested emotional development happens is sort of at the beginning of life. And splitting starts as primally as well. Not for everybody, but for many with BPD, for the majority. Splitting will start in infancy. And I think I've talked about this before, and maybe I'll talk about it specifically, but I don't want to cloud everything here with going on and on about all that. So I guess what I'm saying is, where you say low function, I would say that aside from the defense mechanisms of the rising up of the false self in the absence of a developed self, that functioning could seem low, but that for many people with BPD, there just isn't any functioning there. So there's a lot of defense mechanisms, and essentially they're doing a lot of dancing as fast as they can from an intellect that develops as they get older, but they don't know the self. They don't understand their emotion, the emotional overload, the tumult, the agony that they go through internally, because I've been there and I went through that. So nobody else is ever really going to, if you haven't had or have BPD right now, and you start to be more aware and understand what that means, nobody is going to be able to really describe how it feels unless they've been there. And I have been there. So it's there, but for the grace of God, go you. But yes, you have to compromise a little bit of understanding in that area as to what really is literally motivating, and how little people with BPD know what's motivating them to do what they're doing. They may learn more about it later, and they might be more manipulative, and they might have some clues, and they might, some of them use that way. But I think still more people with BPD are doing stuff that they really don't understand. More of them than not, and you'd be surprised what drives those repetition, compulsion, defense, automatic, negative, protective defenses that are maladaptive as all get out, but that help the person with BPD survive arrested emotional development, total loss of self, rising of a false self, and got them somehow surviving through childhood. So that's how married to the defenses in BPD that people with BPD are, because there is nothing else. And there can't be anything else until they really start to get some help, because there's still going to be that primal, knee-jerk repetition, compulsion, reaction cycle to being triggered, emotional dysregulation, and what that really means inside of these people. So it can be primal, low level, connection capability, or it can just be, for so many as it is, at 0. And that's really tragic, and people need to get help, and they can change that. And then the commenter continues, sort of like a basic animal love, but with no real sense of intellectual love at a higher level. Well, no, unfortunately, I've never thought of it this way before, but unfortunately, I would have to disagree that people with BPD have a basic animal love. They don't. They have an evacuated self. They have a fractured off, broken, snapped off, lost container of self. They don't grow enough to develop before the arrested emotional development. They don't even have any, they don't even have anything that I think we could legitimately say without their intellect, okay, when they get older. They don't have anything else that could be like a basic animal love with no real sense of intellectual love at a higher level. There's no container of self in there for that. That's how broken they really are. And that is a terrifying lost place to try to live your life from. I know, because I was there once, a long, long time ago. I can't explain how devastatingly fearful every moment of life is. And when that happens to people with BPD, sometimes it's devastatingly fearful, unknown. Well, what am I feeling? All this stuff. You can't do anything with it, people with BPD untreated, except think that it's coming from someone else. The way in which the emotional rest and the wound came from usually a cluster B and abusive mother or father, but usually mother. So I don't believe there is in the basic, most primal core of people with BPD untreated, I don't think there is even basic animal love, kind of instinct or whatever, with no real sense of an intellectual love. I don't really know what you mean by that. Because I would think that, I guess we understand love, hope, people that can, not people with BPD without any treatment. We understand love largely emotionally, as felt, as experienced, as shared, empathy, mutuality, reciprocity. But we also, which is lacking in people with codependency, by the way, as well, as it's totally not in people with ground zero BPD and no treatment. But intellectually, I think, I don't know, but I would more say that aside from the emotional experience of love and giving love and being loved, etc., that I came to find in life, thank God, like 40 years ago, I don't know what you mean by intellectual love. Because do we have an understanding of love that people with BPD might sort of fall into later? When they're in their 20s or on, from an intellectual place. Again, not as a reference for love, because they don't have a container of self. That isn't, no, I don't think so. And I don't really know what you mean by intellectual love, because we have with the feelings, with the soul, with the understanding, those of us that can feel and give and receive love and all that mutuality, reciprocity, like I said, I don't know what part of that's intellectual. Obviously, we're aware of understanding it also intellectually, but I don't think it makes it, quote, intellectual love, unquote. And so people with BPD untreated will not really in their intellect be able to act upon something that would be anything near, quote, love, that would be healthy, even from an intellectual standpoint, because no container of self, nobody's home, and the false self is entirely programmed and inculcated to do nothing but defend and annihilate people to come too close. People that try to love, people that try to instill in the person with BPD what they can't fathom because they have no container of self. And they have that fractured off part of self. And so then the commenter, the other part was, hard of it. So like a dog, they may seem to love you, but they cannot talk to you. No, I don't agree with this either. Because I don't know how it forwards understanding, because a dog's love is real. And a dog's love is not dependent on intellect. And a dog's love is not dependent even on emotional maturity. Because the average dog, once they're grown and they've been trained and all that, so, the 2 to 3 year window of, depending on different breeds, how long they take to mature in terms of their commands and knowing and routines, dogs love regardless of that. And dogs really only achieve, so they say, the dog experts say, sort of like an understanding of like a 2-year-old child. So if you think about your dog, like I have a dog that's almost 2, and I have a dog now that's 3 because my other dog's passed away. But and what I can see in them is that they're much more understanding of their environment, of what's expected of them, of the limits, of the commands and etc. But that they're not like, they can be silly and make mistakes and just do things that you like. I thought I taught you better. Now how come you're doing this again? Oh, they get bored or whatever, because they're essentially operating like 2-year-old human beings. That's what I've heard from dog experts. But their love is something that doesn't rely. I think their love is totally like, to me, a soul-based thing from dogs. And it's just totally there and unconditional. So I don't think it's the same to say that a person with BPD could kind of love like a dog but not be able to talk to you, because yes, the communication deficits within borderline personality disorder, and of course people have, it's a spectrum, but for those more severely impacted, it's devastating. The communication deficits are devastating, because that's not all manipulation games and playing I gotcha, I want to get you. People with BPD really, really just defend, distract, somewhat dissociate when they're triggered and you're trying to tell them what you're feeling and what's happened. And yeah, they just defend, distract, and sometimes they will dissociate. And I don't think that's so much about BPD amnesia, as people love to talk about, as much as it's just a little lack of clarity, but they don't have any understanding in the first place. You're talking about trying to communicate with and share love or expect love to come back, like mutuality and reciprocity, with somebody who doesn't even have a container of self. They can't even give it to themselves. So many people with BPD, even when they're in the overcompensatory defensive mode of seeming like they're all that, because they do that. It's overcompensatory. It's not necessarily narcissistic. It's like they'll put, what people with BPD do is they try to put you in a one down position so they can feel better about themselves. Because most people with BPD hate themselves. They don't know themselves. There's no container of self. There's no identity there. And so why do they loathe and hate themselves, whether they're aware of that or not, and then they project that out onto other people with all the punishment, the vindictiveness, jealousy, the hatred? It's because they never learned how to feel anything different. They just had to defend. And I know, I'll just give a example from my own life. When I was, well, not growing up actually, but I was existing because I grew up in therapy between the ages of 15 and 30. Um, so it's, well, yeah, it's like 37 years ago, not quite 40 years ago. Sorry for that. I hate math. I don't like numbers. So anyway, but what I learned in my childhood with, two cluster B parents, my mother BPD, NPD, covert narcissist mostly, and my father was a malignant narcissist, psychopath, dark tetrad. So he was something else. They both were, and they were both alcoholics as well. But so what was happening for me in that childhood? Well, I just learned a lot about how much these people hated me. And then I would, in trying to get their attention and get something, that might have felt good, in that kind of pursuit like kids do or teens do, I didn't, couldn't take in that they hated me for quite a while. I started to do that in my late teens and in therapy, and working that through. That took quite a while. So I was learning hate is what I was learning. They would yell and scream and swear and rage and all that stuff. And my father was very physically abusive. And my mother was, I was essayed by both of them at different times and other relatives. And so the family had a lot of people in it that were like this with cluster B and or other issues. And they were, a lot of them, alcoholics, drug addicts as well, even though they most of them weren't like down and out poor, but we had some relatives like that too. But what am I trying to say is that, children learn what they live. And I learned what I lived, and then I had to unlearn that in therapy. And it was basically that the way to communicate is to rage, because that's what they did. And so I figured if I raged back at their rage, well, maybe like that's how you get heard, because I thought I was hearing them, but like most of what they said was just devastatingly wounding to me. But so I learned this like hate, I guess you could call it. And it would be negative for sure. So dogs aren't like that, right? I mean, unless there's something wrong with them neurologically, or they've been extremely severely abused as puppies, in which case they're often totally ruined. And then we euthanize them, which we don't do with human beings. And I'm not saying we should, but then these human beings grow up with all that woundedness and damage and trauma and act it out all over everybody. And there's no excuse for that. People need to get help. So I don't think that you can equate what's going on with people with BPD with dogs at all, because dogs, they pop out amenable to being loved and caressed and taken care of by their dog mom and dad as well. And then they have their siblings, and like they play and they just enjoy stuff, and they're just, you got to remember how much a dog lives in the moment. People with BPD don't have a clue what any given moment is, separated from all the other moments that blur together, and they have to depend against them, and they don't even know what that is. So I hope that's helpful. I'm not trying to be argumentative with you. It's just my response. And then you said I say this not to be demeaning or to insult yeah, because you're not calling people BPD dogs. I hear you. And we don't want to insult dogs either. You said, but to get a better understanding on the disconnect. Well, commenter, I hope that you might, and anyone that, is interested in what the commenter said and how the commenter is expressing themselves, I'm interested. And then there's what I'm kind of just, working my way through in my response to the commenter, because I don't understand how this might be giving this commenter more understanding on the disconnect. So let me know if it's helping you, or if maybe what I'm saying is helping you more. And if the commenter sees this, maybe they'll comment, and maybe you could explain a little bit more about if that's really helping you to understand the disconnect, because I don't understand how that might be doing that for you, but I'm not going to sit here and say that I could say that it can't be doing that for you in some way. So yeah, if you see this commenter, maybe let us know a little bit more about what you meant there. And then you continued, the commenter continued, as you mentioned, persons with BPD can and do have great cognitive abilities. Yes, and when you say that, in using the terminology of cognitive abilities, we have to also say, so what I am more comfortable saying, as I did say probably, and that's what you're referring to, they can be really intelligent. And they can use their intelligence in many ways, but it's not going to make up for what the lack of self and what they can't do emotionally, etc., when untreated. So when we say cognitive abilities, I would rather say intelligence, because cognitive ability is also lacking in people with BPD. So they can be really highly intelligent, but they don't, but they have cognitively distorted beliefs, just like a lot of people with codependency do. And so then they start to have perception issues and cognitive issues. So to say great cognitive abilities, in terms of intellect, yes, but in terms of a lot of other areas that involve cognitive skills and ability, then they're lacking severely. And the commenter continues, to me, it would seem that they are limited by fear and basic black and white thinking. Well, yes and no. Definitely fear and not having maybe ever felt emotionally safe, going all the way back. I can say for myself, I had a traumatic birth. So I don't think I knew anything about emotional safety, even as the brain biologically kind of records our experience in those, days, weeks, months, early years of life that we don't remember. But there's ways to garner a lot of what happened to you when you were born and etc. by listening to the stories. And if you look at your health chart, like I did about my birth, it was my mother's health chart, but whatever. So when you say they're limited by fear, yes, because they don't have a self and they don't know anything about really feeling secure or really feeling emotionally safe. And they look to that from others, but then when you're giving it, they can't house it without a sense of self, without a container self. So they still don't really feel ever like they are soothed enough or satiated enough or calmed down enough to feel like they're okay. It just doesn't happen for them without treatment. And so limited by fear, yes, and it's much more complicated than just fear. It's a primal fear. It's going through arrested emotional development, which Melanie Klein calls the abandonment trauma, causes the psychological death of the otherwise burgeoning authentic self, unquote, of Melanie Klein. And so what does that mean? Well, it means way more than fear. It means that, and I know this personally, I went through it, with the emotional arrested development, what you learn, and when you're growing, you're aging, you're getting through childhood, but you're not really growing up. And you're stuck back in the past and you don't know what's happening. It's not only fear. This is why we see fear of abandonment be so complex and deep in people with BPD, and fear of engulfment, because it's more than fear. It becomes you lost yourself. So there's a psychological death been experienced, and I know that firsthand. And then what happens after that, you don't know that when you're a kid and stuff. And then, so it becomes the anxiety of the death instinct. So everything that the infant to toddler has experienced that creates fear has been imprinted on the brain as, like, from the early age of like hours to days old, as something set aside from self but recorded somewhere in the brain. That is, so everything that's going on when there's lack of attunement and you're not getting nurtured by a parent, and everything's going wrong in what we need as infants, then what happens is it's imprinting. So the infant is experiencing this anxiety of death instinct, and it's being wired into the brain. And no, when you're days old or whatever, like when I don't remember that, but it's already starting there. So it's much more than just fear. It's like primal fear, but even more complex than to say just that. And the other thing is, they're limited by that, yes, because they've ceased to exist as a human being with an identity because of that. And then you said, and black and white thinking. Well, the black and white thinking is no choice. The black and white thinking isn't even overcompensatory defense strategy mechanisms. The black and white thinking splitting starts in infancy. And I'll just say I know, and I know it's not based on memory, but I know that I started splitting my mother probably in the first seconds of my life. And how does an infant do that? I mean, I could say more about that too, but I would have to do a separate video on that. But I've been through it, and the thing with that is, I think Bradshaw explained this really well, and Bradshaw really never talked much about borderline personality disorder, but he did talk about wounded inner child and that kind of thing. He was really a pioneer in that. And so what he said was, like Freud says mother is the first love object. And Bradshaw said mother's face is the world. So infant is laying there in mother's face when it's not going to attune and it's not going to be giving what infant needs. It's just whatever it is. And maybe it's blank, maybe it's angry, maybe it's hostile. When infant sees that, so say infants, that's how mom is a lot. She's angry, she's pissed, she's tired. She is not attuning to the infant. No, hey, cooey, like all the stuff that the infant needs, right? She's not doing that. Well, then the infant starts to be very distressed. Or let's say mom does that mostly, and then mom might smile at the infant or coo a little bit, and that feels good for the infant. Then what happens in that very, like early months of life even, splitting starts because it's good mom. So the mother that satiates need and the mother that might give a little bit of security, like if they smile or they interact with the child in a way that is connecting and attuning, then that would be good mother. And of course, this is not cognitively thought of at all by an infant, but there's good mother and then there's bad mother, mean, angry mother that comes in. And so what happens is splitting starts, it can start in the first days to months of life, but it's not like the infant knows what's going on. It's just infant can either be okay, for lack of a better way to put it, or infant is highly distressed and maybe cries extra as well. As I know that I was told I never stopped screaming for 2 years. Crying. Well, it was pretty friggin' scary. So, the black and white thinking splitting comes out of usually very primal age territory, lack of attunement, no affect synchrony. The child is not being helped to attune to life and grow in the way that we need to as human beings. And then the commenter said, a deeper examination of this would be fascinating, in air quotes. I mean in quotes. I don't know if you mean it would be or what. As it would also seem that there is a tie-in with a defense mechanism that keeps the self convincing, quote, self-blaming pressure cooker of BPD life ongoing. Well, I don't know if this is your, if what I'm providing here is a deeper examination that could be fascinating. I don't know. But to what you just said there, you're saying that there's a tie-in with a defense mechanism that keeps the, quote, self-convincing, self-blaming pressure cooker of BPD going on. No, not at all. There is no self there. There is nothing. There is a false self that rises up to hone and learn really quickly all of the defense mechanisms that people with BPD maladaptively will learn, unfortunately. Well, they learn nothing healthy and have no container of self to put anything into. So on this point, a tie-in with a defense mechanism. No, the defense mechanism, the biggest and most formidable defense mechanism in BPD is splitting, which I'm describing here, starts for many people with BPD in infancy. First days to weeks, 2 months, or month of life. And when that splitting occurs, it's not like There's nothing verbal going on. There's nothing cognitive going on. It is this biological response that thrusts the infant into overdrive of. So if an infant can be in distress, the person that, let's say, has a borderline mother who's going to blow all this because they're untreated, and they're not going to have affect synchrony, and they're not going to tune, and this child is going to go through all kinds of not only distress, but they're not going to know comfort. And so what happens with that is a defense mechanism of splitting begins, and it's not adequate, obviously. And so the tie-in to the defense mechanism, it's a false self tie-in because the self is emotionally arrested, and the self emotionally arrests, like I said, and like object relations theory defines, by or before the age of 2. So for a lot of people, that's going to mean days or weeks into life. And that's like a devastating reality. And I'd have to like, chapter and verse to explain this even more deeply. But where I'm headed is that there is no quote self at all in the person, in the infant, in the primal, in the 2-year-old, in the 3-year-old, in the 7-year-old, in the 9-year-old, in the 12-year-old person who's going to go on to be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder or have those patterns and maybe not be diagnosed and maybe never get treatment and be living in that hell. Yeah. For life, maybe. So there's no self there's no defense mechanism that ties into any self of any kind that would be, quote, self-blaming pressure cooker of BPD life ongoing. No, BPD life ongoing, I wouldn't even say it's like a pressure cooker at all. It's not even a definable thing. It's tumult and chaos and pain and agony and overwhelm and no way to soothe it and no way to stop it and no way to understand what is it? Where's it coming from? Why do I feel like this? I hate this. I can't stand this. I mean, my mantra in my life, well, quote, growing up, unquote, I grew up in therapy from 15 to 30. But the thing is, like, yeah, there was, it was all just like feelings based and primal feelings based as well. It was what maybe was happening on a given day in my crazy, stupid cluster B family of origin. I went no contact from, by the way, when I was about 27, and I never looked back. And to this day, nope. And both parents, like my father only lived about another 10 years after I went no contact. 9 years, 7 years, something like that. I don't remember. I don't care. And my mother, I was no contact from for about almost 34 years. At the time she died, I think it was 2021. I don't remember. Because, see, I don't care. I worked it out. I got my final closure. I was able to stop hating my father 10 years after he died. That was important to me. I don't want to hold hate inside. But, like, it's not a pressure cooker. It's devastating lostness. It's emptiness. It's a void of like, what? It's feeling so much at once that you can't tolerate it. That's why people start looking to other people. Like, somebody help me, somebody. And that plea, by the way, from core base BPD, or like the traits of I had, and for other people with BPD, is not even a known thing in the beginning. People may know more now, faster, even when they're not in therapy, because all the information. But in my experience, when I was born and growing or like getting older, and when I started therapy at 15, that was like 1974 or something like that. Might have been 74. I don't know. I get numbers screwed up, but somewhere back there. My point is, this is what people who've never had BPD can't understand. I hope you can hear it, though. I hope we can try to conceive of it. But the pain they're in, which, by the way, is no excuse for abuse. I'm not a BPD apologist whatsoever on any score. It's tragic because I know what it's like from the inside out. I know what it's like to walk around, go to school, be trying to do what other people are doing, and knowing that for some reason, nothing is the same for you as it is for them. And you don't even know what that means. And so people would experience this and I don't know. I mean, I'll just share one thing, and I don't share it to say anything about myself in any way, shape, or form. Just, I always had a knowing. I always had more insight, I think, than the average person because I didn't have full-blown BPD. And I really attribute that to my faith in God, and I don't know what else to say about it, but I was very much somebody, like when I was young, probably at least about by the age of 12 or 14, I knew that I wasn't, the way I put it was, I knew I wasn't who God meant me to be, and I didn't know what that meant beyond that, but I had this idea, and certainly by the age of 15, when I wanted to see a psychologist, and I there was a reason why, but it wasn't like, well, I think I have BPD or what's going on. No, there was just a reason why I was being terrified by other things because I was still around the parents and stuff was happening, but I didn't know what it was, you know? And then I would have so much fear and so much dysregulated emotion. The first psychologist I saw, and he talked to me a little bit. And the next thing he said was, because I was sitting on a couch, put your head back on the couch, put your palms up, and close your eyes and count to 10. I couldn't do it. I was madder than shit at that guy for saying do that. I'm like, what? So he kept on, if I didn't do that, like nothing was going to work in this therapy apparently or whatever. And he kept saying, put your head back, close your eyes, put your palms up. We know what that's about, right? Be vulnerable. Show me. Can you be? I couldn't be vulnerable. Like I would just yell, and tell the guy off and give him a hard time. And he kept saying it. And then I remember, maybe like a few sessions in, one day I tried it. I did. And I put my head back and I closed my eyes and I did put my palms up. And I don't know if I made it to 10 seconds or whatever he wanted, but I did it. And I might have stopped it pretty soon after I started it. And I don't know if he was using reverse psychology or some such nonsense because it was really bad what he did. So I said, there, I did it, okay? And he goes, I didn't see that. Do it again. I was right there. He lost me. Forget it. It was over. So anyway, I wouldn't see him for too long anyways, because then I was moving to another city to go to university, and then I would hook up with another therapist there, another therapist. So what I'm trying to say here is, how can I describe this? It's just all negative, horrible, annihilating, neurotic, scary, terrifying feelings. Because the feelings feel like, I know when I was in this, had BPD or the traits up there, the feelings felt like they were going to annihilate me. And then, so you feel like that, and it's all internal to start with, and you don't know that, because I thought my parents were doing this to me like it was, and I mean, they did a lot to me for sure in the wounding department. But so, there's no way to conceptualize that except to think other people are doing it to you. And because it starts when you're a young kid or infant or toddler. And the thing is then, and stuff, I'm talking about when it is a cluster B family and when it is all abusive and crazy, the environment, etc. Then you have no reference for safety and you don't even know that. And, I can remember, like, I'll just say, like, walking home from school in grade 9 and being like an ambulance would go by. And I was like convinced that it was my mother. Oh my God. A mother that I hated, a mother that I never attached to, a mother that I had trauma bond with, a mother that never showed me an ounce of squat that mattered. It was all horrible. I mean, it just was. I've healed from it and let it go. But I'm just saying, I'm walking along, I'm totally detached from these people, but of course I'm not in another way because I need them to survive and all of this stuff. And so I would feel not, oh, I'm like somebody might worry, oh, geez, is that going in my neighborhood? Is that going? No, for me, it was way more than that. And then as a kid, like walking to public school and coming home, I was devastatingly worried about if I see, because I heard the saying, step on a crack, break your mother's back. Took it literally. And and was worried about how I felt about my mother, but she was mostly seemingly insignificant because my hatred of her was so bad, I couldn't even feel it or be aware of it. So I don't want to go into this too much about me. It's just I'm trying to share something here that I hope will help people to understand this. The bottom line is, so I was painstakingly having to obsessively make sure I didn't step on a crack. Because there was a part of me that would have loved to have had my mother break her back. I mean, I never was violent. I never did anything to my mother. But there was that hate part of like, screw her anyway. So maybe that's what made it so obsessive for me that I couldn't step on a crack, because what if it broke her back? And I mean, I was a kid and. So, but with that, so it's all about feelings that have nowhere to go, don't make any sense. And so what do people with BPD do with those feelings? And what did I do with those we try to give them to somebody else real quick. We don't even know that. We're just trying to disavow. We're just trying to get them out of us because we can't survive with them in us. And so that's emotional dysregulation. It's not just people get triggered to it. It's like a constant state of being when you're a kid and you're trying to survive and you don't know what's happening to you. And we would have many moves and such, and like every time we'd move, I just get bronchitis or throw up or get the flu. Like things would just, I had nothing emotionally to deal with any, so it would totally get into my biology, right? So I just want people to understand that a lot of people with BPD, it's not the same for everybody, but the core absolute arrested development, if the mother is a cluster B and there is nothing coming that you need, or you get the odd smile or something from another relative, but it just, and I think that my two grandmothers, one who unfortunately died when I was 7, and nobody would speak of her again. And I worked that out when I was in university taking a course on death and dying, because I wrote an essay about it. It was kind of the assignment, and that was an easy 100%, because do I know loss and do I know? Yeah. Well, the thing is, anyway, it's all this raw emotion. So it's not like people are just being triggered. That shows more, people think more of that in relationships, right? Like you're around this person now and they're getting triggered and they're telling you maybe they're getting triggered, and people have language for this now that I never had. And people that were, going through this way back never had. But the key thing is it's just all emotion all the time. All sort of like too much. So everything that hurts and is negative and scary is all too much. And then the other part that I didn't even understand as a kid is the part where it's like, and there's nothing. All that I feel is horribly scary and terrible and too much. And then there's like on the other side of that, there's nothing. And that's devastatingly annihilating. And to keep surviving through that, there's nothing that people can do but keep throwing it out of self. And not even self, throwing it out of an abyss. And that's really the motivation behind what a lot of people with BPD do to people, how they hurt, why they can't take in love, why they can't love you, why they can't attach to you. And it's very compelling to understand where that's coming from and how that's motivated. That's what I focus on, obviously, clinically, right? But when you're in the situation with somebody, in the relationship, or it's a friend, or it's a parent, or it's an adult child, or whoever it is, it's like I'm asking you here to think about, because this commenter kind of wanted to try to go deeper, and I'm not sure that they did, and I don't understand what they're saying, and I'm trying to go deeper to maybe elucidate something about that and help. So the thing is, when you're trying to understand the disconnect in BPD, anybody out there, right? Commenter and anyone, you can maybe get some kind of understanding. I hope what I say helps. But you have to know, it's just called raw nerve, overwhelm, everything's not okay 99% of the time. And that can be happening at times when a person isn't in high activity or raging or just a scary half of stuff. There's just no coping. There's no dealing with anything. And I mean, I think for me, again, like when I was a kid, I played a lot of sports, I was very active, and that probably helped in a way. But I can remember things like when I was going to hockey games, when I played hockey at university and stuff. I mean, and for some people they'll have other things, but I had the IBS stuff going on. Just gut stress, right to the gut, right to the gut, right to the gut, or to my neck, or to the gut, and then maybe a few other places in my body. But every time before I'd go play hockey, which I liked, and I think I enjoyed as much as I could grasp anything to like and enjoy, I would always have to be like a good hour in the bathroom prior. And then it was always like, how do I know if I can leave the washroom now and I can go and play and it'll be okay? And like usually it was, and I can remember a couple times it wasn't, and how fast I had to pound on a thing in the middle of a shift when the game is going. I had to pound and get somebody to open a gate, and go flying into a dressing room, get a key, and try to get all my stuff off before the inevitable came out. And I won't tell you how that went actually, but that only happened to me twice. So playing baseball, playing hockey, playing all other sports, I would always have this problem ahead of time because I was scared shitless of everything. And even when I tried to enjoy and whatever level of enjoyment I could reach, it wasn't without this tumult of foreboding, god awful like feelings and stuff I just knew I didn't know how to cope through. And so the only thing I came to learn about that was, yeah, you can go to the washroom, go through this, and then there's a point at which you can go on and play the sport, and like generally speaking, it doesn't happen again. So, but the bottom line is, it's all emotions. You can't compare it to a dog. You can't say it's this, that, or the other. Because I think too many people try to put the cart before the horse. Why does the borderline do this? Why does the borderline do that? Why do they punish when you try to love them? Why do they do this? Why? Well, for whatever reasons that people can come up with that can partly explain or explain to a degree why they're doing what they're doing, there's a much deeper underlying thing that motivates all that they do that they don't understand, that they don't have awareness of unless they go to therapy. Are some people getting some awareness of that now from the internet in a way intellectually? It could be. But like I said to people with codependency in a lot of videos and on my podcast, no matter what you understand about your codependency and what's happening in a trauma bond, you can't think your way out of it. So your intellectual understanding isn't going to help you to heal and recover. That's the emotional territory, your emotional landscape. Same thing is true with people with BPD. It doesn't matter how much they know. A lot of them, are untreated, ground zero, and they're becoming PhDs in psychology. But it's not going to help them understand themselves, not going to help them fix themselves. So I just want to say in closing then that what I want you to understand is it's all feeling all the time and nothing all at once. It's hell on earth. And so if you have compassion for somebody with BPD that hurt you, that's going to help you in your healing. If you hate the person, if you can't stand them, you just think they're an evil whatever and like screw them, your prerogative to feel however you feel, etc. But the hanging on or hating or being angry, they're all evil, blah, blah. Those people don't really heal. So you have to be able to work through that to be able to heal. Oh, but it doesn't mean you have to care about them or anything. Because in fact, too many people with codependency care way too much, way too long. And it's not that you should just go, but you need to let go. You need to stop caring because you need to turn all that you're giving them and trying to care and rescue and fix them. You got to start putting that into you. So BPD at its base and what motivates it, yes, we have certain levels we talk about it at, right? And I think this commenter's really kind of missed it. But if he feels he has more understanding, I hope this gives you more understanding, because it's all that they do in all of the iterations of what people with BPD do, that there's no excuse for abuse, and it's traumatizing other people. But I can tell you, when I was in that place, I had no idea what I was doing. Do I think that absolves me of things that I did to hurt people way back? No, not at all. And when I was in therapy, that's when I learned and I started to understand. And that's when I learned about my lack of self in other, and that I never was getting anything really to do with other, because I was drowning inside of all these feelings and no feelings at once. and the hell that was. But I went to therapy and I stuck with it and I did my time and I learned my lessons and I developed a container of self and I was helped and I was reparented and I did grow and I did heal and recover. Why do I put it like that? Because that was my responsibility. My parents did the damage and it was my responsibility to do something about the damage. So I wouldn't keep having to live like that, number one, to tell you the truth. But number two, when I remember how much I cried and grieved in therapy when I learned how I was really affecting other people and impacting other people. I had no friggin' idea. Today, do I think people might know more? Maybe, but there's still a lot of people out there with BPD ground zero, and they don't have any idea. They really don't. Some of them might, but I had no idea, and I grieved so much through that therapy because when I learned how I was impacting other people, and I didn't have any idea, I really hated that right away. I was, like, so hard on myself. It was so painful for me because at that point I was learning and understanding and growing past that and changing and maturing and evolving. So I consistently held that. And I'm not saying any of this to go back to my past and say that some of the things I did in my past, and I was never violent or anything, but the ways that I hurt people, no, I mean, I've grieved it, I've let it go, but I would never say anything but that, like, I needed to do what I did, which was go to therapy and learn and unlearn all the maladaptive coping defense mechanisms and learn what I didn't learn in childhood. So I was reparented in that process after a lot of the core work around the BPD issues and stuff, the traits, the reality of that were dealt with. But that's the best that anybody with BPD can do, and that's what their responsibility is. And I mean, I remember saying, talking in videos like 16 years ago on this channel, and I don't know what happened to some of them. They're not up anymore, but I don't remember. But I remember talking specifically about, and there might be a couple that are up right now that are 15, 16 years old, and they're still there. And I was talking about, people with BPD will say, well, I didn't ask for this, not my fault. Okay. And I might have felt that way too. But the bottom line is, so it's hard, really hard to accept this. So my parents were like they were, and that affected me greatly, and that caused me arrested emotional development. And yeah, did they have responsibility and all that? Sure they did back then. But as I get older, it becomes, so this is the thing that most people with BPD fight against and don't get anywhere in therapy for a long time or whatever. It's different for everybody. But you have to be able to learn about personal responsibility in therapy with BPD. And when people go, I didn't ask for it, it's not my fault, my mother, my father, which I've alluded to here, but I don't, go into anymore. Point is, yes, what happened to me, and then, oh my God, and I had to deal with it. But the key thing is, we need to go to therapy. People with BPD need to go to therapy, need to learn how to take personal responsibility because no, we don't ask for it. No, it's not anybody with BPD. It's not their fault they have BPD. And that's a really effing injustice to deal with and to radically accept. And it's where a lot of people with BPD get stuck. But the point is, it doesn't matter what happened to you in your childhood. Once you become a young adult, it's time to do something about it. And I knew that at the age of 15. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know, all the terms or anything. But I just knew that I couldn't go on the way I was going on. And man, I'd have to go on through a lot more before it was going to get better. But it's the primal feeling, too much feeling, can't deal with it, overwhelmed. And all of a sudden it's like a bunch of horrible feelings engulfing and annihilating you. And then all of a sudden within that, in the middle of it is nothing. If you can imagine what that feels like. That's what motivates borderline behavior all day long. And it's not justifiable, even though it comes out of unbelievable brokenness, woundedness, and suffering for most people with BPD. But they still have the responsibility to do something about it. And I remember wrestling with that because there's no fairness in that. My parents did what they did and wrecked me. And I didn't learn anything I needed to learn as growing, so I had to go to therapy. But there comes a time when we really have to work on the radical acceptance of that only I could stay in the therapy to be helped by the fantastic, not all of them, but I had a few fantastic therapists where I really got through the whole process. And the point is, so it doesn't matter what we ask for, we don't ask for. We're children, we get wounded, we get victimized, we get hurt, we get annihilated. Well, then we have to like step up to the plate in whatever way we can find our way there. And I was doing this without the internet and without books. So today, there should be more there on people's paths to help them, but it may or may not help them. But the thing is, anyway, what motivates so much of what people with BPD do is just a state of brokenness and a fractured off identity that they're trying to deal with. And it's unsatiable and nothing soothes it. And there was a book I read somewhere in my process a long time ago. And in the book, it was like a book that was written by a psychiatrist for psychiatrists. And I was just lucky I had an IQ, I guess, that I could read this junk because I was able to take something away from it. But in a part of the book, it was talking about borderline. Now, I probably wasn't understanding half of it at the time, but there was something in there that stuck in my head when I was young. I was in my 20s, I think, early 20s at the time, and still going to therapy and going to university. And it was like when the borderline, and of course it used the female, pronoun, but when the borderline can soothe herself, she's no longer a borderline. Now, it's not that simple, but that speaks to the asinine ridiculousness of the gall, the audacity of the American Psychiatric Association with the hegemony of Big Pharma to do what they're doing to especially females with BPD, with this whole idea of psych meds. There isn't one that's going to help. People should avoid. I never took one in all my process. And the other thing is that because they don't help. And the other thing is that they are saying that, psychiatry needs to figure out how to cure this. That is absolute BS. This is human brokenness. This is trauma. And for some people, it's perceived abandonment. So it didn't even really happen to them, but it's the perception. And that gives them BPD as formidable as if they had the cluster B parent, because not all of them do. 13% of them don't. So the key thing is to realize the wayward nature of understanding BPD from some of the pioneering psychiatry crap with the hegemony of Big Pharma. Because guess what? Half of them are probably narcissists. There's some good psychiatrists out there. I'm not, But the point is, what they don't know, because they didn't have BPD. Well, I know a whole lot more than they'll ever know. Not on everything, but because I know what it's like from the inside out. So I'm just trying to tell you, if you really think you're going to understand that to the nines, and that's what you're hoping your healing is going to be based on, or you're getting going no contact, or your deeper understanding of the disconnect, like this commenter said, and I mean, no disrespect, commenter, you can comment back and let me know what you think. Like maybe you have something else to say further about what you're saying, but I would respectfully say I don't think so. Because to really understand that disconnect, first of all, you have to realize you're not going to understand it as much as you want to. I hope something I said and shared here helped and will help others. But I don't know what people do with that when you haven't experienced it, so you can't know what it feels like. I've tried to describe it and I wasn't prepared. So, I could try. I've done it. I could maybe try to do that again sometime in some other kind of way. But the point is, there but for the grace of God, go all of you, even though you might be still in trauma bonds and you can't get, detached from these people and you're going through hell. And your hell and your pain is very real and important too. And I'm not measuring. It's just that as bad as it gets for people with codependency, and it gets really bad for many people. And I don't like this measuring pain thing. I don't really do it. But I just want to say only one thing about that. Nothing touches the pain of what the borderline actually feels and can't deal with, and then behaves and acts the way they do, which is not an excuse for that. And it's sort of like, and I'll go on to say, and the narcissist, I'm not, validating any of their behavior or anything, But what they do is a little bit different than what borderlines do because, yes, they've been really wounded. It's usually like age 3 or between 3 and 5. I don't know what to do with the phone. It just keeps sliding all over the place. Between age 3 and 5. And their woundedness comes just a little bit later in development than the borderline woundedness. And then some people might think, well, doesn't that make BPD the worst of them all? No, for interesting reasons. But the thing is, so narcissists, they get stuck in that stage of development where it's normal for a child to be, look at me, me. Hey, mom, did you see me jump in the pool? I'm jumping in the pool. I'm doing this now. Look at me. That natural, healthy narcissistic phase of development in early childhood is where people that go on to have NPD get wounded, hurt, and that's where they get stuck. And so for them, it's attention, it's supply, because for people with NPD, they're generally much more defended than borderlines in the sense that they have multiple sort of like much more formidable false self-defense mechanisms that is sort of like between their experience of life and the agony that is within and the emptiness underneath all these defense mechanisms. So what's the difference there? The borderline doesn't have that protective layer. The borderline is feeling everything. And the narcissist has a way with more, what's the word I'm looking for? Stronger narcissistic defense and overcompensatory defense mechanisms and everything. And the grandiosity is the main defense in narcissism. There's splitting too, but splitting is the main defense in BPD. There's some grandiosity in BPD, but it doesn't measure up to NPD. So the thing is, the narcissist will succeed more often, not the covert, vulnerable, fragile, which isn't a diagnosis, but it's a thing. They don't, and then they look more like they're borderline. And then people think borderlines are more like them because there's this element of narcissism. But there is pathological narcissism in borderline personality disorder, ladies and gentlemen. Check out my video on this channel and maybe try to put it under this one. Something called, like, I think, pathological narcissism and borderline personality disorder. So, this is where clinical, like, I mean, I understand some of this from my own lived experience and what therapists said to me too. Because yes, I had narcissistic defenses within BPD, but they weren't narcissistic personality disorder. So narcissists are generally more successful at whatever they have to do to others, which is horrible, right? And I'm not saying it's excusable, but they are more successful in protecting against the feelings. And that's what makes them even more abusive often than people with BPD only, but hard to say. But the thing is, they will stay out of, so that grandiosity, why they need their ego inflated all the time, it helps them to protect and stay out of the pain. They have formidable defense mechanisms against it. People with BPD don't. People with BPD are rolling in the muck of it all the time. And narcissists are offshooting that even more effectively, but not necessarily deviously on purpose. So there's narcissists and then there's malignant narcissists and beyond, and it gets all different. But I just wanted to say that because you might be wasting your time to a degree to want to understand the disconnect in BPD to such a level. Because how far can you really understand it when you don't know what it feels like? I hope this has been somewhat helpful. And I found the comment really challenging in the sense of, intellectually stimulating to try to explain this more. And I always welcome that. And I think, comment or all due respect, that your comparisons, that your way of trying to, I think you're trying really hard to understand that disconnect. But I think you missed something really pivotal and central and crucial in it all. There is no self in a borderline that perpetuates anything. It is the agony, the feelings. Like I said, it's all the feelings that nobody can handle with the emptiness in the middle and just being annihilated like every 10 seconds by everything and not even knowing what that means, especially when people are young or back in the day when So I would just encourage people to not try to understand it too friggin' much. And I would love your feedback. It's not about my ego. Just let me know. Did I help you understand it any better? Does it make sense? Or are you just going to say, I don't give a shit how much they hurt because look what they did to me. And that's okay because I'm not sharing this with you to say that. And for people with codependency, you've got too much compassion and you're way over giving your empathy. Oh, please don't let this make you feel sorrier for them, because they have to do something about it themselves. You can't rescue them, you can't fix them, you can't change them. And I also would like to say, and I welcome comments. You want to like have a dialogue with me over this, it's fine. Keep it constructive, and I'm all here for it. I'm totally here for it. I'm all here for it. Well, all of me's here for it. Oh, look out. No. Point is, that you won't be able to understand the depth and the reason of the disconnect for people with BPD unless something I just said helped you, because you can't fathom it. And there, but for the grace of God, go you on that score. But when you're in the agony of the codependency, of the like trauma bond, of all they've done to you and how they're, yeah, well, first of all, please hear this. Where there is all that abuse going on, and I'm telling you the reasons for it, but it doesn't excuse it, you should get a feeling for how, like, you can't control it, you can't help it, you're not going to be able to satiate, fix, soothe them, or anything. So what are you doing to yourself? And then that comes back to the question of how people with codependency don't know themselves well enough. The codependent, dysfunctional relationship to himself, because there's something in this that's driving you to want the borderline back, to want to make it work, all the relationship recycling. But it isn't about the borderline at all. It's something in you that you're trying to find. Something from a wounded child level, something unconscious. So could that also be driving do you think it's going to help you with your pain and agony and process to healing, to be able to understand the disconnect the way that this commenter is trying to really deeply understand? And I see you struggling with it. Like, I'm no disrespect. I think you've been doing the best you can to try to put it together the way you could. And I hope you don't find that arrogant of me or like insulting. I don't mean it that way. So if you think that understanding the disconnect, and I'm saying this generally, not just to the commenter, if you think that understanding the disconnect in BPD more deeply, or really, really getting it, unless what I'm saying here is helping you sort of more get it, that's not even required for you to heal. That's just you going into red herring territory to escape your own pain, and not on purpose, but through repetition compulsions, presenting yourself, building your obstacle bigger, instead of getting into help to build the obstacle of breaking the trauma bond doable and unpacking it and breaking it down. So I've said this before, but not for a long time. Trying to understand that disconnect to the degree that the commenter is, I wonder if the commenter will have any different thoughts, maybe not, after hearing this, because it's not territory that you should even be invested in, because you need to let it go. Because you need to celebrate your life moving forward, or wherever you are in your life. If you've broken the trauma bond, if you've healed, if you're moving forward, or if you're in that process, you need to understand the focus on that is always going to be somewhat obstructive. It's going to be obfuscating something, and or it's just going to be a pursuit that isn't going to help you in the way that maybe you think it is. And if you still think that you need that to, I don't know, what, feel better, be better, heal more, move away from it, just understand it better because you still care about the person with BPD, is that the best use of your time and energy? So I hope this helped. As always, we're food for thought. Welcome all your comments, any questions, and believe me that what I've described here about what happens for a lot of people with BPD, and they might experience things a little bit differently than I described, but agony and pain and feelings can't handle, don't understand, plus emptiness in the middle, everything all at once, and everything feels annihilating. I say that to help you understand, but I do not say that for you to feel more sorry for people with BPD, because they need to take care of themselves, and they can do what I did and other people have done. They can go and they can heal and they can recover, but they have to go to therapy. You need to let go. You can't help them. You can't hang around for their 8 to 10 to 15 to 16 plus years of doing this. And DBT doesn't help people to get this recovery, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. It's not the modality for that. And I just want to say finally here that everything I've described to help you to understand what's going on inside of people with BPD, or what I know I experienced way back, is not for you to excuse one moment of abuse of any form, of any type whatsoever. It's not to justify anything that people do with BPD. Just know that it's not this purpose. Like for most people with BPD, it's not this purposeful, driven, I want to get you thing. But don't they kind of get you anyway? And don't they punish you? And don't they do all kinds of untoward things and say all kinds of incredibly wounding, horrible things? And there's no justification for that. And that's what so many people with the patterns of not yet diagnosed, with BPD not getting help, they just don't get that. And they continue to say, but we this and we that and we the other thing, people with BPD, in this crazy we narrative they have out there. Quote, we narrative out there. None of it justifies a damn thing you're doing. However, I hope this video might have helped you to understand a bit about maybe why they're doing what they're doing, but it still doesn't make what they're doing acceptable at all. And please, if you're still in the limbo, recycling, on, off, hovering, waiting, wanting to get the borderline back, don't feel extra sorry for them based on if you hear this. Because I believe people with BPD deserve compassion, but that can be hard. It's kind of like, I have the lived experience, and so I walk my talk. I don't just say stuff and I haven't lived it in my life. So with my parents and other relatives that were cluster B and wounded me tremendously in childhood, yes, I had to work it all through, and I did, to the point where I forgave them and let it go. But forgiveness is not wanting someone back in your life or anything like that. When I forgave my parents and other relatives and such, and well, then the BPD NPD alcoholic I was with and a couple of borderlines I was with along the way on the other side of the fence, when I forgave all these people, one at a time, different processes, whatever, what's the word I'm looking for? Yes, you need to remember that forgiveness, you can't put the cart before the horse. You have to heal first and then work toward forgiveness. And some people will never get that done, and that's fine, But I was determined that I didn't want to have any hate inside of me, because I grew up with hate and I hated hate, if that makes any sense. I just wanted peace, and I did. So I worked harder and went deeper and had a lot of help with this initially, like when, in my initial therapy. And to once I got through a whole bunch of stuff, it took me like 10 years later, after I was recovered and finished therapy, to 10 or 15 years later, to forgive my father. But forgiveness, when it's right in the process, if you even want to go there, which I think it's really healthy to go there, it helps to go there. But like for me, no, not just for me, forgiveness is remembering. You process, you grieve, you remember, and you let it go. But it's not for them at all. It's for you. And so I wanted it, and I knew, and I was aware of a certain part of my process. Not only was I going to need, and I did receive some people's forgiveness, and I had some people that made no contact from me, and like some of them are still trying to contact me now. I don't know why, but I don't want to play. I don't want to go there. No, thank you. And it's not sour grapes on my part. Like what they did to take care of themselves, like almost 30, 35 years ago. Fine, I respect that. So anyway, and you see, when people recover from BPD, they don't usually turn back. So I had some friends and people in my life that backed away but didn't give up. And we weren't really involved. And some of them kind of maybe backed off, no contact. And then as I worked my way through the process, the people that would, that the door was still open to talk to, because I knew the ones where it was totally shut. And the people where that wasn't the case, then I very carefully contacted them to ask if I could make amends. when the time was right and when I had the capability to do so. And so that's what happened, but I didn't contact anybody that was no contact, that didn't wanna hear from me. Apparently, some wanna hear from me all these years later, but whatever, like, But the thing is, and my partner is somebody that was a friend of mine for just over 30 years, um, so way back, and then, she had a life partner for much of her adult life, and I had a few healthy relationships in there, but I'd had a couple of the cluster B ones from the non-cluster B side, and, so I know where you people are walking in your shoes, because 'cause I've been in those shoes. I was in those shoes with my parents and other relatives. I was in those shoes in a couple of adult relationships after I healed and recovered. And so the thing about that is, you know, you have to take care of yourself, and you have to get your own therapy and healing. You don't wanna be hanging on to anger, and you don't wanna be feeling too much compassion or empathy for them while you're drowning in self-abandoning yourself, right? So anyway, I hope this was helpful. I don't know, I've gone on a long time. I can't see that far, so the time period escapes me when I'm doing these things. I hope that was helpful, and please, I hope you can hear what I'm saying, that if this helps you to understand, or somebody else's description who's been through it, helps you to understand more about BPD disconnect and what's really happening and the lack of self. There's no container of self. There's no identity. It's not just identity diffusion. It's identity fractured away. And unless a lot of therapy, it's not going to be found, reclaimed, built, and the container of self in a therapeutic way taken in by the person with BPD, because it's all about undoing the woundedness that was done. And so, yeah, think about how much you want to understand it, and don't feel more sorry for somebody with BPD who's not seeking treatment, or even if they are, don't feel more sorry for them or more compassion or more empathy for them than you're willing to give yourself, because that's what codependents do all day long. So, hope it was helpful. Sorry if it was long. Take care.